just feels weird to me that we just basically are saying there is no entry level in security, or entry level in security is full, and therefore don't even worry about coming in at that level
Well,
anymore.
well, there
Your path
is.
is going to be so difficult.
There are people coming in entry level and pen testing. Can you imagine that? Like no idea what it's like on the corporate side, and they're going to start hacking stuff. Like
Yeah.
no concept of the consequences of taking a system down, taking a database down in the middle of the day, in a production environment. No appreciation for that, and it happens, because we are
None of
treating.
us did, Adrian. 25 years ago when we were pen testing,
We
we didn't
should
have
know
that
better now.
experience either.
We should know better now.
Welcome to today's episode of the CyberY Pod. I believe this is episode number 5. Welcome to the CyberY Pod, where security, technology, and business meet. TCW is your go-to auditory and visual feast summarizing the captivating world of cybersecurity. On the pod, we bring you a monthly roundtable where humor meets hacker culture. We delve into the latest in cybersecurity news, trends, and mishaps, offering up a unique flavor of commentary for your consumption. Whether you're a seasoned InfoSec professional, a budding hacker, or just a tech enthusiast hungry for knowledge, strap in for a ride through the cyber wilderness. With the CyberWide podcast, you're not just listening to a show, you're joining a movement. So, only here, only now, welcome to the CyberWide Pod. And I'd like to open today's CyberWide Pod by introducing the team. Joining me today at the CyberWide studio are two, not three, the usual three. We're down one today. Joining me today at the Cyberboy studio are two of my absolute favorite people on the planet. First, I'd like to introduce you to Adrian Sanabria. Adrian Sanabria is the CyberWise resident tech wizard. He understands and deep dives all things bits, bytes, and blinking lights. He makes sure the TCW team goes as deep as we do wide. He's the ump in Grumpy Old Man. He's the 2020 reincarnation of Vital Sassoon and the Jason to my Momoa. Adrian, welcome to today's show.
Thank you. And we do have some technical analysis today that I'm excited to get into.
Yes, we're getting into some meaty stuff this week, so that's going to be exciting. So, also joining me today is the wonderful Katie Teitler-Santullo. Katie is the CyberWise strategic savant, navigates the complex of cybersecurity vendor marketing policies, which we're going to hit on today, practices human impacts, only outpaced by Adrian. Katie's hair is the 2020s version of Nicole Kidman. She's the brains behind the CyberY brawn, if you think we have that. And of course, she's the most well spoken of the bunch. Please welcome our ray of sunshine in an otherwise dark studio, KT. Welcome, Katie. How are you today?
I am well, thank you. Good to be here on this sunny afternoon.
We're recording on a beautiful Sunday, actually. And we do not have our fourth bestie. He's not with us today. Rick Holland had another engagement, so he's off. I don't even know what he's doing, but he's doing things that are probably more productive and more fun than this. And I'm your show moderator extraordinaire. Uh, Finally, last and certainly least, I'm the host with the most, the driver of this bus full of freaks and weirdos, and the founder of the CyberY, Tyler Shields. With that, let's get on with today's show. Thank you to Material Security for being the official sponsor of the CyberY Pod. They've sponsored a bunch of the opening episodes for this show, getting us off the ground. They're just a wonderful group of folks to work with. They have great products. Secure email from every angle. There's more than one way in when exploiting email as an attack vector, plus even more ways to target once you're inside the mailbox. Material takes a holistic approach to email security that covers the full threat landscape, stopping new flavors of phishing and pretexting attacks in their tracks, while also protecting accounts and data from exploit or exposure. Visit material.security to learn more about their multi-layered detection and response toolkit for email. Thank you very much, Material Security. Shout out to you guys. You guys are fantastic. And now on with the show. So to open today's show, we have a bunch of, it's been an interesting couple of weeks since we actually did our last pod. The news has slowed down quite a bit in the summer. I'm a little bit shocked at the speed and pace of which interesting content has been coming out. But we do have a few technical nuggets and a few policy nuggets this week. But let's open with the hot button. Let's open with literally something that broke this morning. We'll open with the most brand new hot item being discussed, and that is Wiz being acquired, potentially being acquired by Google. It dropped all of a few hours ago. That Google is reportedly in talks to acquire cloud security company Wiz. Um, my notes here are incorrect. It says 2.3 billion. I believe that's supposed to be 23 billion
Yep.
is the correct amount. Um, and the acquisition aims to enhance Google's cloud security offerings by integrating Wiz's innovative technologies and expertise in security posture management. This is a massive acquisition. Adrian might have the numbers off the top of his head of the largest of all time. I believe it was Splunk. Was that the largest cyber acquisition of all time?
Yeah, this is going to be the biggest for Google, but yeah, Splunk I think was the largest of all time, and I
And
forget
that
how
was in
much.
the 30s.
Yeah,
That was in the 30s, if I recall correctly. And this has got to be in the top three.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's definitely up there. But Google is reportedly in talks to acquire Wiz. The acquisition would be, one of Google's biggest acquisitions. I think they did WhatsApp for 28 billion or 29 billion, so it's in the same range. Sorry, Microsoft did WhatsApp, right? Or Facebook did. Facebook did WhatsApp.
yeah.
I'm getting my fangs confused, but um, Adrian, what's your thoughts on this? You actually sent a little bit of analysis on the potential revenue and multiple on this one in our Slack channel. You want to run that down for the folks?
Yeah, I think it was August. Well, and by the way, on the biggest acquisitions for comparison, Symantec, Broadcom picking up Symantec's enterprise assets was 10.7 billion, and then Norton
Wow.
LifeLock picking up Avast was 8.6 million, and Splunk was 28. So this is pretty close to Splunk. This is a clear number two
If it goes through,
if
if
it
it goes
goes
through,
through.
because that
Yeah,
this
big
being said, we
asterisk.
have seen these things fall apart
Huge if
after
true.
being a
It's
yeah.
it's true. We have seen these things fall apart, and sometimes we don't know why, but often there are some signs, and we can get
Yeah,
into this, Adrian. I know you've done a lot more looking into this, but with this one, there doesn't seem to be any massive red flag, right?
yeah.
Wiz has been
Well,
growing
we can talk about that.
like absolute craziness for just 4 years.
Yeah.
Um, they
Well,
raised a huge amount of money, almost 2 billion in funding, which
mhm.
okay, maybe some people will say red flag. Um, they're just they seem to be this unstoppable train. So it's not like the last potential acquisition, the Lacework one that fell through where it was like, yeah,
Mhm.
no kidding.
True,
That
true.
with that one, maybe there are some signs, maybe there are some little things, but it's not like that at all.
Yeah, so looking at so one of the things that's unusual, yeah, as Katie notes, they grew super fast. This is a 4-year-old company, and one of the things that's unusual about them is they've been very open about their revenue numbers. Of course, they're not a public company, so we don't get to see details. They just throw out a press release with a nice big round number and say we're making this. Of course, in this acquisition, Google's going to go through some due diligence, and Google's a public company, so we'll eventually get to see some of those details if this does go through. But if you map the trajectory of their claims, August 2022, I think they were 18 months in. They said they were doing 100 million ARR. And then earlier this year, February 2024, they said they were at 350 million. And if we continue to draw out that line, that puts them at about 498 million right now in July of 2024. So that would be, if anybody's following along and doing the math, that would be a 46x acquisition. The likes of, I don't think we've ever seen a multiple with a deal that high in security. I think Duo is probably the largest that I can remember, and I think they get acquired for 2.35 billion when Cisco picked them up, and I think that was like a 20 something. That was like 23x or something like that, and that was unheard of. So this is like literally double Duo. So this is unheard of squared. But yeah, the question is, how are they growing at such a clip, and nobody else is? Why are they so far out in front? Yeah, I know. I think it was the last pod. Maybe we talked about certain incentive systems that were considered unethical. I don't know if Wiz partakes in any of that, but I don't.
Yeah, my guess is they might have early on, but that quickly, that quickly jumps way past having any importance as that company grows into
Right,
as
that only
meaningful
scales
as
to
it
a
did.
certain point, I would think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But this growth rate is incredible. They according to the report here too that this potential acquisition or this acquisition rumor comes 2 months after Wiz announced raising a $1 billion Series E at 12 billion. So the reason that I think they're getting that multiple that they're getting, Adrian, is because that's the only way this deal will happen. Because without going from 10 to something much more, or I'm sorry, 12 billion valuation 2 months ago to something much more meaningful, they'll never get acquired. They will just continue on the IPO path. And because it's
Yeah.
such a strategic acquisition, that it has to be some kind of massive jump for that to occur. And so 12 to 28 is, what is that, 2.5x? Just rough numbers off the top of my head, 2.5x last valuation in 2 months. The people that put the money in that last round, which is I don't even know who it is. I'd have to look. But the people that put the money in that round are getting a 2.5 exit in whatever amount of time, right? 2 months, or once things close, let's call it a year or 10 months or something. By the time it's closed, that's a pretty good return on that late money. So that's the reason they got the multiple that they did, not necessarily comparing it against revenue, but it's just that's the only way that we'll sell that company.
Yeah.
Right, but them wanting that or asking for it is different than somebody giving it. And
Yeah,
so
that's
the
Google's problem.
well, exactly, but if so there are a couple of things that come to mind, right? Like, something is only as much as somebody's willing to pay for it. So obviously Google sees some potential. Wiz, if we take everything at face value, all they've done, all they've built, the companies they've acquired, the space they're in, the seeming mass amount of attention on what cloud is going to do now and in the future, um, and also the fact that GCP continues to lag. And despite the fact that some of the other cloud providers may have issues, uh, you know Microsoft in particular, with cybersecurity in general, sort of reputationally, Google is still fighting for that market share and they've been lagging for a really long time. So, is it a smart decision for them to go after the company that's seemingly growing faster than anybody, that's seemingly doing a lot of right things, that's seemingly very well liked by a lot of people in the industry? You don't hear a lot of bad about Wiz. You certainly hear a lot of bad about a lot of players, but I don't get a lot of bad feedback about Wiz in the
How d-
marketplace.
how does this change? How does this change the landscape of cloud security in a few different ways? I'll ask that question. One, Adrian, you brought this up in our pre-show discussion, so I want to bring it up here. Does it matter that it's Google? Meaning, is it a single player problem here? So that's question one. Question two is, does this change for all of the other smaller vendors who have been saying we can't make any headway in the market? We've got this £100 million gorilla crushing us. Does that give an open opportunity for smaller companies to now grow and prevail in a market that otherwise had no oxygen left in it?
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity for the orcas out there. Where now competitively they can point to this and say, well, clearly this product's going to deteriorate on the AWS and the Oracle and the Azure side of things, and they're going to prioritize their own cloud. For any new features, for they're going to take preference on that. So I don't know. I mean, a good question here is, how have we seen that affect Chronicle? Because I don't think it was ever any secret that Chronicle was going to get folded back into Google. It was like the worst kept secret ever. They were funded by Google, and I think they pulled them back in fairly early, much earlier than they thought they would. But I guess you could send all your Microsoft logs over to Chronicle instead of using Sentinel, which is the built-in option for Azure. But I doubt many people do. There's so many benefits to keeping it within an ecosystem. I can't see how this doesn't have a big impact on the competitive space, and kind of, take, I don't know how much wind this takes out of Wiz's sales, but it is
Yeah,
weird,
it's I
right?
think it's fundamentally a great question until you think of the bigger picture. If you zoom out a little bit and you think of the macro players that I've always talked about for the last 24 months, Palo, Google, CrowdStrike, Microsoft, the macro players that are trying to absorb they're trying to turn cybersecurity into like 3 or 4 markets, and that's it, right? From what is maybe, let's call it 100 or 500 different hyper segmented markets, they're trying to turn it into, hey, there's like 3 or 4 markets. That's it, full stop. And so if you believe in that vision, does this put Google as a player in that vision where they're saying, hey, because of AI, because of our data collection, now we've got Wiz, we're going to be a player that can run up against Microsoft here. We're going to be a player that can run up against Palo here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's maybe it's enough removed. Security tools are enough removed from the cloud service provider side of the house. That they can make this work, but it still feels kind of weird to say, yeah, I'm going to buy Google to secure Azure, right? Like, why wouldn't you just use Google's cloud then? If you're going to go with their cloud security solution.
Well, it's a great question then. I mean, the follow-on question is, does security bake itself in appropriately into each cloud? And that becomes, hey, I'm an Azure shop. I buy the Azure one. If I need the Google stuff, I'll add on the Google stuff for the small little pieces of Google that are 10% of my cloud deployment or 20% of my
Yeah.
cloud deployment. But I'm just going to use whatever I have baked in for the cloud provider of my choice. It's a good question. I think the dynamics that are happening at that macro level are going to be very, very difficult to kind of unwind or foresee for the next year or so.
Well, and we got to remember now that these are big CNAT platforms, there's large chunks of the product that are not CSP specific. Of course, there is the piece where you're looking at the console for GCP, for AWS, for Azure, but then there's also the workload security that doesn't really care. Containers don't care where they're running. EC2, if you're running VMs in the cloud, they don't really care as much where they're running. So some of that security, particularly the shift left, development pipeline type components of it, if you're looking for vulnerable libraries in your containers, that kind of stuff, it isn't really going to be that Google, AWS, or Azure specific.
Yeah, interesting. I definitely think this makes more opportunity for smaller companies now, up and coming smaller companies in adjacent markets to Wiz, where they had little to no oxygen before. They had no ability to execute because people would always just say, "Hey, you're just going to be acquired by Wiz in 6 months anyway. So why am I going with you now? I'm going to wait 6 months. Wiz will gobble you up." I think this opens up some white space there. But I also think it takes away white space in the integration side of the house, because now
Yeah.
instead of integrating with Wiz, you're integrating with Google directly, which they may not be as friendly from an integration vantage point as Wiz has traditionally been when others are looking to do an integration
And,
with Wiz
and
technology.
raises a question. Does this put pressure on Oracle, Azure, Microsoft, Amazon to do a similar buy in this market?
That's a great question. Absolutely great question. Any additional color, Katie?
There are just so many questions about it. I mean, we could probably spend the entire hour and a half, 2 hours talking about it. It's the integration question is enormous if you look at what they've been doing, and I think the downstream impacts of this, there's going to be some interesting stuff that happens. Some of these smaller companies might get swept up in it. Some of these smaller companies might lose a lot of traction because of it. So the question of, does this open up some space? Absolutely. But does it also equally create opportunity for some of these smaller companies, or not opportunity? Does it also create a conundrum for some of these smaller companies who can't play on that big of a stage?
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah.
absolutely an interesting one to watch.
Yeah.
All right. That is an interesting opening topic. I appreciate you guys for hopping on that immediate news. Literally, it happened a couple hours ago, so we're able to break this one directly. By the time the pod gets published, you will have heard of it through other channels, but hopefully our analysis is useful to you. Let's jump on another one from Adrian, another opening piece of content here. This week, Adrian, you did a little bit of analysis on the RockYou2024 uh, data dump, database password leak, whatever we want to call it. Um, so I mean, it's an enormous password leak. And it's funny. I remember back 25 years ago, I used to keep my own password databases. And, whenever a dump would come out, I'd merge it into my database. Who knew that there could be actual value in that? But there's been
Right.
businesses built off the back of that
Yeah.
value over the years. If
True.
only I had, foreseen a little bit there. But RockYou 2024 is massive. It's huge. Given the magnitude of RockYou 2024 password link, do you think that there's any immediate steps organizations should take to mitigate any risks there, mitigate any potential security problems, protect your users, or is this not even? Is this a nothing burger graphic for us?
100%. I think the biggest risk is talking about it, is wasting any breath on it at all, and we're just going to waste that breath on this podcast so that you don't have to, right? And yeah, so if you've ever done any password cracking, it can be really useful to have a list of common passwords because it's going to be quicker than brute forcing the password. Once you get to a file with 10 billion lines in it, you're possibly talking about the text file being larger, taking more resources than brute forcing. So what's the point? It just doesn't make any sense. Like your bottleneck now is going to be your storage, being able to read this 246 gig text file. And so I kept seeing these headlines: 10 billion passwords leaked, 10 or 20 billion passwords leaked. Was it 10 or 20? Does it even matter? Like it's I think it was 10, 10 billion passwords leaked. And I was like, okay, well, like it's been a while since I've played with an enormously large text file, and I do have some skills from way back in the beginning of my career as an system engineer back when I was on the IT side before I got into security. So yeah, let's download this thing and play around with it and see what's in it. And I played with it for a couple hours and didn't come across a single password. Everything I found in there, and this is where we could possibly throw up some graphics. So if you, I include the link to my Mastodon thread in there, and this is one of the key reasons I wanted to do this. Is everybody's talking about how this thing is full of plain text passwords, as if this is something you could just pass to a password cracker and use it as a dictionary file. And so I included some photos, or not photos, screenshots in there of what this thing actually looks like. I'm going to drop it in our Slack here so you guys can see what I'm looking at. And it's just garbage. The whole thing isn't garbage. There are passwords in there. The entire RockYou 2021 leak is in there. And so there is stuff in there, but if there's anything new, it's buried. But the bottom line here, the point is, to get any use out of this file, it would take so much effort that I'm pretty sure 100% of people would just prefer to do something else. Use another leak file, use older stuff that's already out there. Because just validating and stripping all the garbage out of this would be an enormous lift.
What's the point, Adrian? Help me even understand. Like, okay, so I'm flashing back to a long time ago. I was at, I don't remember if it was Hope or one of the DEF cons, and somebody made a statement early on, and this was during the
Rainbow tables?
was it Rainbow Tables era, right? And the whole point of Rainbow Tables was by pre-computing hashes or pre-computing password to hash combinations, we could significantly speed up how we actually do brute force cracking. And the key wasn't the compute question. The key that struck me was jamming stuff in memory is going to be way faster than trying to get stuff off a disk, right? And if we're going to look at this list you have of passwords that are just pure garbage,
Yeah, these
like
are not
just
passwords.
line after line of nulls, and who put this together, and why did they, can we even come up with any reason they thought there
Waste
was
people's
additional
time.
value in that?
Waste people's time.
Do you actually think it was a troll attempt to like actually waste people's time, or is there an actual is there some kind of goofy, weird combination of null and hex characters that you can type that would work as a password for some ultra secure system?
No, no. Most ultra secure systems are the least permissive in terms of what you can put in them. So most social networks and things like that, you can use emojis in your password. They'll let you do that. And there are people who do that, who have emojis like appending the beginning and end of their passwords. And yeah, you could argue that makes it harder to brute force. That makes it a little bit more secure. But if you go to a bank or anything like that, they're only going to let you do alpha symbols and numbers. That's it. So yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of what's in here are not passwords. It's just garbage. I don't know where the garbage came from. There's a lot of Russian stuff in there. There's Cyrillic. There's Chinese characters. Um, and there's like bits of cookies and config files and things like that. There are truncated hashes, which makes the hash completely useless. You can't reverse the hash, you can't pass the hash, you can't do anything with half of a hash. Um, and it's yeah, I think somebody, maybe it was just reputation, like you know reputation in forums and the dark web and stuff like that is pretty big. So being the guy or the person who put together the biggest password dump ever maybe gives you some cred in the community.
But
I
doesn't it
guess if it was
reverse
useful.
it? Yeah, doesn't it reverse that cred when people start figuring
When they
out,
find out it's bullshit.
hey, yeah, I mean, it's like the coolest kid in school, and then, he does something or other and it turns out it's a lie. Like everybody's like, "Oh, you're not so cool anymore," right? So
Yeah.
it it if you're that kind of person and you're sort of a devious person anyway, don't you think about, hey, I'm going to be found out? Or are you really that stupid that you think nobody's going to investigate it and they're just going to go with the sensationalist headlines? I mean, we've certainly seen that in other areas of media where people just believe anything they read, but this is
Yeah.
not that community. Like cybersecurity is not a community that just takes things at face value and is like, oh my God, this
So
is the worst thing, I'm not going to look at it.
So the guy that came up with the myth that 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of having a data breach, he continues to this day to repeat that, even though he's been confronted and has admitted that he made it up, that there's no data behind it. To this day, like we know who he is. I can go check his blog, and just last November, which is 6 years after he admitted it was faked, he was still using it because people love that quote. That quote it just fuels certain narratives, and they love it. Like there's I don't think he's making money directly off it, but it certainly helps his image, even though a big chunk of the industry knows it's bullshit.
So, what you're saying is that even when people want to or can go and find out the truth, they just choose to believe BS when it favors them for a good sensationalist headline?
You're
Is
in marketing,
that
you know the answer to this.
that's
Never
that's
let
my
the truth get in the way of a good story, Katie. Come on.
yeah, maybe that's my
Every
problem.
marketing
Wait,
team out there pushed out this 10 billion passwords thing. Everybody.
maybe that's why I'm not rich and famous. I can't do that.
I can't
I
either.
strike that line. I mean, fortunately, where I am now, they haven't asked me to. I've only been there a couple months, but I guarantee you, if my boss put that in a newsletter and I said, Melissa, NFW, man, like, no, she would be fine with that. But how can you responsibly pass on, quote, data that's been debunked? Why wouldn't you want to be a true seeker? Maybe this is why I just don't have lots of friends. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe the quest to
wh-
actually find the truth makes me
why does
uncool.
cybersecurity ventures exist, right? And this is
Yeah.
not the only one of these that we have on the list today. I don't know if we'll get to the other one, but the other one's about the supposed talent pool available in cybersecurity. And
Let's go ahead. So
My
before
head
we bring that
hurts
one up, because
already. My head hurts
I
already.
I I want to go right into the talent pool question after I ask one question. Have password lists, dumps, etc., lost their value in the modern era of 2FA and phone-based 2FA?
Not
I
at
feel
all.
like everything of value for me is 2FAing against my phone anyways.
For you.
Not at all.
But
For you.
yes, Katie, but you got to also understand I'm not a security person in that way. Like when it comes to my own personal security, it's much more lax
It's
than
out
it
the
should
window.
be. It's out the window. I'm one of those guys that preaches it and doesn't do it.
No, I
So
get it,
for
but
me to have
whatever you're
the
doing,
majority,
though, is still better than the average person.
but for me to what I'm saying is for me to have the majority automatically setting up 2FA, I just got a new laptop, everything automatically converted over to the laptop, and I can just swipe my finger and have all the passwords automatically work on everything, and they're all different passwords, supposedly. Given that, like, do dumps even really matter anymore? Is there
A
really, like, true
Adrian,
value in
help me
having
out
it?
with Tyler. He's not understanding what I'm saying. Help. Help. The fact that you have different passwords, the fact that you're using your thumbprint, the fact that that makes you better than, I don't know, I'm going to make up a, what's that
Yeah,
statistica?
yeah.
Makes you
It's
better
very
than
relative.
78% of consumers. Like,
Right.
But does it? That's exactly the question I'm trying to ask you. Does it anymore? Are we lowering that bar fast enough, right? By giving 2FA, like my son has 2FA on his phone for all his college stuff, and it's forced by default for all of his college stuff that it auths
Yeah.
against his phone. So my question is, are we pushing that bar down fast enough that massive dumps like this don't matter anyways? So that's my question.
Yeah. 2FA has so many faults, though, so many issues.
Sure,
What if your 2FA gets turned off? Like what apparently happened with Google, where Google turned off 2FA for all Google Workspace admins.
sure, yeah.
And they were supposed to be enabling it, like enforcing it for everyone. Like it was optional before, and something happened where it flipped to the opposite, and all of a sudden, every Google Workspace admin with 2FA got turned off all of a sudden. But yeah, I mean, as long as you're going to find hashes, as long as passwords are still used as even one factor, I think the dictionaries are still useful.
Maybe this just gets to me being a futurist in the sense of, I foresee this coming where there will be a day where we don't have to worry about passwords
Yeah.
nearly as much. I don't think there's ever
Yeah,
going to be a day
banks
where
are
we can
still
ignore
roughly
them, but
37 years away from that, though. So
37, arbitrary number, good
that's my
guess.
guess.
I can tell
I'm going to
you,
take the under.
I can tell you, I write to my bank on a regular basis to bitch about their cybersecurity. It
You
does
need
me
to
no
switch
good.
banks. You
I
need to
do.
switch banks.
Yeah, I don't
I
use
know.
banks anymore.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
I do, because they have horrible password and MFA practices. I wrote to their
I
CISO.
just
He ignored me.
I just keep my cash underneath my
I
mattress.
I use Chime. I use neobanks.
Look at you. You're on the cutting edge.
I mean, it's a lot nicer. No fees for anything. You do everything from the app. It's yeah, it's just maddening. Like going between my old credit union and Chime is just maddening. Like the difference. It's just
Yeah, my son said to me,
it's like visiting
something
the
similar the other day.
1980s.
Yeah, my son said something similar to me the other day. He was talking about he just keeps everything in Venmo and bounces it back and forth in Venmo. If he ever needs to pull it out to his bank account, he does, but he doesn't usually put it into his old school bank account. He just leaves it in Venmo and bounces things around if he's got to pay a friend something or
That's
whatever. And
funny. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
I
they'll
feel
let
like
you
that's
leave those
more the
balances
future.
there. Yeah, PayPal, all those will happily let you leave a balance there, so they have some fun money
Yep.
to invest. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then he's also got a Venmo debit card, and he can withdraw it cash. Like, so at what point does
Yeah.
that become your bank account,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it really is. Yeah.
What else do you need? Nobody writes checks now, anyways.
Nope.
Everybody's just direct paying everything through direct transfer from A to B. So,
Unless you're running a
okay.
B-sides and you're trying to get paid by sponsors, and then they all write checks, and they
Oy.
Ugh.
send them to you as slowly as possible.
Net 60. Okay, so you brought up the next story that we want to talk about, Adrian, and that is, I believe it's marked in our calendar here in our script here as cybersecurity is full.
Yeah.
I saw this come through, and it did There was a link, cyberisfull.com, where someone posted an article discussing the growing importance of cybersecurity um, in an increasingly digital world, but highlighting specifically what specifically is full. And
Right.
then it actually sparked a lot of debate in a number of Slack channels, people taking both sides of this equation. So what did they mean by cyber is full, Adrian? What is the high level story on this one in particular?
So the industry needs cybersecurity talent, but unfortunately, it's in like the middle band in terms of experience of that talent. Like nobody's just clamoring for junior people to train up. Nobody's building these pipelines to train new folks just right out of school. And I've had several mentees, so I've experienced this through my mentees as they try and go straight into cybersecurity, from, either shifting from a different career or coming out of university with cybersecurity degrees, going and paying for expensive boot camps and training, getting certifications, and then they show up and everything is minimum 3 to 5 years of experience. So they're like, okay, like how do I, where's the ladder to get to that 3 to 5 years of experience? Like, where's the 0 to 3? Where's the 0 to 5? And it just doesn't exist in the industry. I mean, it does in small pockets. There's internships. There are places you can go that have built that pipeline, but it's a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of the industry, and they can't support all the people who want to go directly into cyber. But a lot of these boot camps, a lot of these training things, like the way they market it is, go straight, go from Starbucks to earning 100 grand a year in 6 weeks with my training course. And so that's a big chunk of what I think fueled this website, Cyber is Full. And that's what they're trying to debunk is this is not an entry level field. Uh, this is not, I mean, yes, some people have gotten into it as their first job without moving over from IT. But for the most case, as it was in the early days, it remains today a much better strategy to go into IT first, get your entry level jobs over there, programming, admin jobs, cloud engineer is now very very popular. SOC is maybe the only cybersecurity job you can get into, and it's the last thing I would recommend to my mentees because it's just
Yeah,
an
because you're not going to have a pipeline.
awful place to be. Like, yeah.
So is this I mean, it's directly counterpoint to the once every 6 months, 3 months story about a bajillion job openings in cyber. Come and get them,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Is that? And I've long since believed that that's probably a myth, and just kind of one of those commentaries that people say in perpetuity that just continue to spin from one person to the next because they've heard it somewhere, so they repeat it. There's 3 million job openings in cyber, or whatever random stat they tend to quote. Is all that bullshit? Is all that garbage? And the reality is that we are full, except for maybe one or two specific bands where gaps are needed, and it's hard to get into those bands without coming up through the ranks, and it's a matter of maybe time to fill those bands.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think that summarized it well.
Well, there you go. We can stop talking about it then. So that mid level is the issue, right? And so how do we fix it? How do we fix the problem though? Like, and I've looked at the site itself, cybersfull.com. Go check it out, folks. It is a really interesting read. Um, how do we fix the problem? How do we get it? All right, I'm going to throw my cyber optimist card out there again and say, is this an AI solution where we can AI away some of the base entry level stuff and get those guys educated into the mid level over the course of the next 3 to 5 years? Could that help solve the problem?
Yeah, I think the way that we hire and train people up is broken. If you look at most of the training, it focuses heavily on security operations and pen testing. Like those are the two tracks you can choose getting into cyber or DFIR. There's a lot of data forensics, digital forensics, incident response paths that you can take, and often that's a separate degree from like a cybersecurity operations degree. And like it really fails to give you um, or recognize that you really need to understand IT well. Security is a secondary layer that's on top of everything. And whatever you're appending the word security to, whether it's cloud security, data security, application security, if you don't know applications backwards and forwards, if you don't know databases, and data privacy, all that stuff, if you don't know cloud backwards and forwards, you're not ready to add security onto the end of it. So you've got to, you got to have that baseline fundamental knowledge and those skills, and like understand the corporate politics, how to the relationships between IT teams and security teams, things like that. You're really not prepared if you're trying to go directly into security without all that.
I mean, if that is the case, then should people say, "Hey, you know what? I want to be an application security engineer someday. I need to spend 5 years doing app dev. I need to
It's
spend
not
3
5 years,
years
it's 2
doing
years. 2 years is enough.
okay, 2 years, and then 2 years doing software engineering, and then, a year, leading a team, and then transition."
Mhm.
Is if that's the correct path, and the gap is within that middle to upper band of expertise, we're never going to fill it.
Yeah.
It's the reality isn't that it's cyber is full. It's that the gap that exists for the experience level we need will never be filled. That pipeline is going to take
Yeah.
forever to fill.
Well, and the other problem is we're not very good at hiring for what we actually need. We hire for what we think we need. And Andy Ellis has some good talking points on this. So find Andy Ellis talking about hiring on other podcasts. And like he points out, when he needed to build a security awareness program, he didn't hire somebody with a background in cybersecurity. He hired a teacher. When he needed somebody to put together these big annual reports that Akamai, or semi-annual reports that they put out, he didn't hire somebody with a background in cybersecurity. He hired somebody with a background in journalism, in writing. So I think that's part of it there
Mm.
as well. Is we need a lot of diversity of background in cybersecurity. Not everybody needs to have a programming background, or gaming background, or hacking background, or something like that to get into security.
I mean, it just feels weird to me that we just basically are saying there is no entry level in security, or entry level in security is full, and therefore don't even worry about coming in at that level
Well,
anymore.
well, there
Your path
is
is going to be so difficult.
there are people coming in entry level and pen testing. Can you imagine that? Like, no idea what it's like on the corporate side, and they're going to start hacking stuff. Like,
Yeah.
no concept of the consequences of taking a system down, taking a database down in the middle of the day, in a production environment. No appreciation for that, and it happens, because we are
None of
treating
us did, Adrian. 25 years ago when we
right.
were pen testing,
We
we didn't have
know
that
better now.
experience either.
We should know better now. Um, and then the same thing for tier one SOC analysts. You hear folks who have done that job talk about, like people talk about being EMTs. Life saving job. First responder. And yet getting paid almost nothing. Terrible job conditions. So you actually see a lot of churn. You see a lot of people where their first and only cybersecurity job will be working in a SOC. So that is not the place to be bringing in. If we're going to bring in, make cybersecurity have entry level jobs, it shouldn't be the worst jobs that we have to offer. And those are the jobs that really I'm hoping AI takes over. Right, is just
Well,
going through billions of alerts every day, and trying to validate them, and hand them off to whoever needs to look at them.
well, that approach works for the legal field, right? Like bringing people in, giving them the worst jobs
Yeah,
possible for the first few
yeah,
years.
Also, the finance field. Finance is the same way.
yeah.
Yeah,
Consulting, like traditional management consulting, same thing.
but I don't think we're saying there is no entry level. I think it's more nuanced. I think what we're saying is that entry level isn't your final career, your ultimate career, your dream
Well,
career. There are
what,
other
what,
things that you should be looking at for an entree into cybersecurity. But I guess my question is, does that obfuscate the whole cybersecurity undergraduate degree or even grad degree
yeah.
programs that have all been, because when we all, well, I got in a little later actually, and I didn't come up through a technical background, but certainly Adrian and Tyler and most of the people I know who are about this age range, you didn't come in with a, bachelor of computer science, right? You came in because it was an interest, because you had
Mhm.
certain skills, not to sound like Liam Neeson, but, you learned you learned the trade, and you
On
learned
the job,
different
yeah,
areas around cybersecurity first,
and
so
with my home lab,
isn't
yeah. Mhm.
it's not that you didn't have an entree into it, it's not that you didn't have an entry level job, it just wasn't the, "I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna be, the CISO in 5 years." It's that you have to do certain fundamentals before you get to cybersecurity, and that fundamental might not be cybersecurity.
Well,
It might be something tangential.
and to back it up a little bit, Katie, to clarify, yes, there are entry level cybersecurity jobs, but what we're saying is the number of people that are looking for those jobs and ready for those jobs, they don't exist. Like there's not enough of them. There's maybe one for every 100. Yeah, I don't know the actual numbers, uh, but we're churning out way more people who think they're going to jump straight into cyber and find out they're just not. And from
But
talking
that's
to
what I
people, the
mean, the
average I
feeding
hear,
ground, the pipeline is somewhere else.
yeah, the average I hear is like 2 years for somebody to get into cybersecurity after they get the certifications, the degree, all the things that they thought were just going to get them right in the door. Whereas nursing or something like that, it's weeks. After you get out of
Yeah.
school, oftentimes and nursing kind of ebbs and flows. Right now, it's looking for people because the pandemic burned out like an entire generation of nurses. Um, so yeah, no, cybersecurity is not like nursing. Yes, it
Yeah,
pays well,
and
but you won't get a job 2 weeks after getting your
sure.
degree.
It totally reminds me of when I was coming up and everybody was like, "Hey, go get an IT job, IT job, IT job." And then you started hearing on the I always make the joke, if my job position is being advertised on the radio as come to this school for a 6-week boot camp and you'll be an IT pro or you'll be a pro in whatever career that they're trying to crank out hundreds or thousands of, that means you're commoditized. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that there's hundreds of thousands of entries. It
Right.
means that you only need 6 weeks of experience means you're going to come in as a grunt button pusher, and that's basically what they're going to crank out of those slots. And so I always said whenever my current role or career was being advertised on the radio, that's the day I move on to a different career. And IT to security was my shift. Now for many people that could be a situation where, hey, security in that entry level side is commoditized, there's nothing there, it's full, so I'm not going to waste my time there. I'm going to go do nursing, whatever the alternate is, right?
And go to a career
Um,
fair. Look up online. It's not hard to validate. It's not hard to debunk some of these numbers saying that there's 4 million open positions. And then see what is the required experience for those positions. So that would be a fun research project for someone to do. I mean, this
yeah.
there's a lot of information on this website, but ultimately, like they haven't done the data analysis. So I think it would be interesting to see somebody do that.
I mean, if the government is saying that there's hundreds of thousands of openings, because I've even seen it repeated at government levels, why aren't they doing anything around this? Why aren't
Right,
they
and
putting
they are.
educational materials out there?
I actually did some work for NBISE where we were trying to figure out how to build that pipeline, and we tried to figure out. So a lot of it was like aptitude testing, like putting together a test where you could test somebody. You know how they do for military and things like that, where they try and with an aptitude test try and place you. And we did that for an incident responder, and I forget what the other role is. This was 15 years ago, but but yeah, but the problem is for almost all government jobs, CISSP is required, and you can't get a CISSP without what's the minimum of 3 or 4 years
I think it's 5.
of experience. So
Yeah.
again, they ran into the same pipeline problem because they decided to have that 5 year experience cutoff point. So run into exactly the same thing again. So we've seen some things where to be able to hire enough people, they've relaxed on drug testing. They've relaxed a lot of different things,
Yep.
college degrees, even for some roles. But yeah, it's getting past those base requirements, particularly the experience thing, is one of the biggest challenges here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So,
Interesting. No,
people are
that
throwing pretty good resumes, I'm sure, because you know they're going to get 1,000 resumes and they can't look at each one, so they have to have some kind of criteria to narrow it down,
mhm.
and a lot of good stuff is going to get thrown out.
Yep, yep, absolutely. So we got a couple of other interesting articles here that I could bundle together. I'm going to take a shot at. Let's go into the top of our list here. The topic on our script here is the SEC is weakening the cybersecurity posture of the United States. Here is why. Hopefully, you guys had a little bit of time to read through this article written by Ed Amoroso. It's a LinkedIn article. He's the founder and CEO of Tag Cyber, Tag Infosphere. And he's very well respected, but pretty well connected to the CISO world, having been a former CISO himself, a very big name CISO at some large institutions.
AT&T, wasn't
And
it?
he wrote, I believe it was,
Was
I'm
it
not entirely
AT&T,
sure, but I
Katie?
know it was a
Yeah,
massive,
17 years at AT as the head of security at AT&T.
Yeah.
exactly. So he's got over 40 years in cyber. So, he speaks from an area of, um, well educated on what the CISO thinks and what the CISO in particular has to say about things. And he wrote this really interesting, scathing article about um, where he says, in over 40 years in cybersecurity, I've never seen any domestic source doing more damage to our nation's cyber posture than the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, is today. He believes that they are weakening the nation's ability to protect itself from cyber crimes. Um, obviously, the intent of the SEC is not to weaken weaken the national security posture of the United States. I'm sure that's not their intention. Um, but he brings home some really interesting points in this article about CISO behaviors being caused by SEC actions and SEC sanctions and activities. In particular, CISOs are starting to minimize what they write down in email workflow and text based off of SEC mandates and SEC risk analysis. They're spending more time with their lawyers than ever before. They are anyone with a prior CISO position is now being forced to play back decisions made years ago because the SEC is allowing issues to come back to haunt them over time, and things are being scrutinized under a different set of criteria. CISOs are being forced to file 8Ks that otherwise might have been avoided. Um, and at the end of the day, many CISOs are quitting, leaving, or worse, never entering the profession to begin with. And so, let me open with Katie on this one because I know she knows policy well, and I know she knows the voice of kind of the CISO in a different angle, I think, than Adrian and I might. How do you perceive the impact of the SEC's cyber regulations that they've been putting into play over the course of this year? Um, and the overall, will it be effective in increasing security, or will the net result be CISOs being scared and having significant risk in what they do, and maybe not even becoming CISOs?
I don't think we're not going to see people wanting to be CISOs.
What's the
These
draw? Let me ask it that way. Let me flip it over. What is the draw to becoming CISO other than ego that says I'm a C-level executive? I don't think I ever want the
Massive
role. Actually, I know I
compensation.
don't. Oh, it better be massive,
Massive
massive.
monetary compensation. Yeah, I think the
well,
midpoint
if
is like 600K, something like that.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, total
so,
compensation,
yeah,
not
so
base.
Ed has debunked that as well, saying the compensation isn't what people think it is. That's a whole other issue. I think regardless of one's salary, there are massive incentives monetarily to being a CISO, and I do think there's a certain for some people it might be the control, it might be the power, it might be the notoriety. I think for others it's kind of like politics. Originally they get into it because they really want to do good in the world, and then they
Mhm.
realize how seedy and greasy it is.
Mission-oriented
um,
folks, a lot of mission-oriented
Mm.
folks.
a lot of mission oriented folks who then get caught up and realize, whoa, this isn't security at all. So I think there are two reasons people would get into it. So you can't really put a blanket statement on it. I think The issue is that we've got people in cybersecurity, a certain set of people who believe that nobody could potentially even fathom what it takes to run a cybersecurity program, especially at the scale of a Fortune 50, Fortune 100, Fortune 500. And they don't believe that anybody other than cybersecurity practitioners has the right to impart any rule over that. The issue isn't that they're right or wrong necessarily, because I could argue both ends of that. If you've got experts, theoretically those experts are the best informed. That is quite literally the definition, right? The problem is that we keep having problems. The problem is that we keep seeing companies doing bad things. And I'm not talking about the seedy, underhanded, mafia like or inner circle things we were talking about on the last podcast. I'm talking about basic, rudimentary fundamentals that keep getting missed in major cybersecurity programs that do have funding, that do have resources, that do have the potential to cover all their bases, starting with mapping everything to your MITRE attack. And yeah, you're going to time me out. Okay.
I'm going to time you out because I want to ground you in something specific here, Katie. I opened up the sec.gov link that I have in our article. The Securities and Exchange Commission today, this is July 26, 2023, adopted rules requiring registrants to disclose material cybersecurity incidents that they experience and to disclose on an annual basis material information regarding their cybersecurity risk management strategy and governance. The Commission also adopted rules requiring foreign private issuers to make comparable disclosures. Now, the argument that SEC Chair Gary Gensler is saying is that, look, if a company loses a factory in a fire or millions of files in a cybersecurity incident, it doesn't matter. It's still material to investors. So what he's saying is, I don't care how you lose it. If you lose it and there's risk to be had here, you need to put the correct mitigations to that risk in play. And if it gets lost, you need to tell your investors. But where things get gray, and this is where I'm really confused and concerned, it's easy to say a factory burned down. But when data is replicated and taken and not destroyed, or when you have these other types of breaches that may not be ransomware like we're seeing super heavy today, but maybe other types of breaches, what makes a breach material if nothing gets stolen, destroyed, or lost, right? And that's where the gray areas become very difficult for me, is what is a risk, what is a breach, what is material. And sure, if you're like the CD, I think CDK or whatever they were, the car vertical SaaS car manufacturer that got absolutely wrecked and had to pay $25 million to get their stuff unransomed so that all the car dealers in the United States could come back online. Obviously material. 25 million, obviously material. But where do you draw the line on material? And then where do you draw the line as far as a CISO having to report that? And that's where I find this to be very, very vague and difficult to handle.
So I don't think that changes my argument at all. I think the issue is that we've got security programs, very often led by CISOs, who are missing big things, causing material breaches, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I'm not saying security is an easy game. I think the problem is that we keep having so many issues that the SEC and other government entities feel they have to do something because the industry isn't self-governing in a way that's making it better for the consumers, for the end users. I think we've got a situation where laws are being passed because people don't quite know what to do, and the self-governance model isn't really working. I've actually spoken with Kevin Johnson. I don't know if you guys know him, but Kevin Johnson at Secure Ideas. He and I used to have these conversations a long time ago, and he's spoken about that as well, the self-governance model. But the problem is, who wants to have to look in the mirror that closely? And that's why these government entities are stepping in. I'm not saying it's necessarily right. I'm not saying they have the expertise. We have another story on here where I think we're going to have a little
We'll get into
governance
that too.
issue.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is, speaking specifically to this article and this point of view, is that there's a little bit of arrogance and there's a little bit of anger that anybody who is not in the cybersecurity field, anybody who doesn't understand cybersecurity and the fine line that CISOs have to walk, that they shouldn't be meddling in our business. I think that's where a lot of this point of view comes from, and not necessarily looking at the regulations themselves and why they came to be. They're coming to be because we keep having major problems that could be at least mitigated with better cybersecurity practices.
I think they're targeting the wrong people. I agree with that. Here's the problem. Hey, I need you to make sure that no fires burn down, but I'm not going to give you any resources for fire extinguishers or water dispensing systems in your factory. And good luck. Have a nice afternoon. Right. The real problem here is that the CISOs, I think the majority of CISOs that I've ever spoken to, given infinite budget, infinite resources, would do all the right things, or at least try to, because as we discussed earlier, many of them are mission oriented. They want the mission to work. But the reality is they're not given what they need. They're stopped short of being protection, or being protected. And that's predominantly because risk mitigation is a cost to reward problem. It's a balance, right? If I have infinite resources, I can mitigate all risks, so to speak, right? And you have to apply a balance there and know where to put that balance. Who gets to make the call on that balance is actually not the CISO.
Yeah.
He gets to make recommendations on that balance, but the business makes the call on that balance, whether they want to be oversecured,
Absolutely.
undersecured, whether they want to reallocate security resources to engineering resources
You
because they
want to have
need to do
a big impact
compete
on
in.
security? Be the CIO.
Well, I think it goes even further than that. I think CEOs should be smashed when it comes to this stuff, not CISOs. I think CISOs, what if you continue to target the CISO with this? I think Ed is completely right. At the end of the day, they're just gonna CYA more than they are going to focus on getting the right thing done. They're going to not put stuff into email. They're going to act, in the situation that makes sure that they don't end up in jail and that they do the quote best they can and without putting themselves at risk. And that's just a horrible spot to be. I would never want to be a
I think
CISO.
it's already
Yeah.
happened. I think we're already there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, from the CISOs I talked to, I just talked to one who just moved from a public company to a private company, and he won't shut up about how lovely it is. How, like, in a public company, like, I mean, you're just working on regulatory compliance. You don't get to touch security stuff at all. You don't get to do anything that focuses on reducing risk. It's all reporting. It's all, making sure that you've got certain regulatory things and those processes in place. But yeah, to your point, security teams don't do security, right? Like, they advise. It's an advisory group
Correct.
within the organization that tries to convince the people that can have a direct impact on security what they should do and what they should change.
And even if you make the argument that the security team buys the tools, operates the tools, and those kinds of things, the CISO himself still is advisory
Right.
because he doesn't really get to say, I need 100 million in budget to do it right. Give it to me no matter what. That's not how that works. He's still advising at
With
the
the
end of the day.
exception of maybe interacting with employees, like security awareness, which has largely been proven to be ineffective anyway. So,
Well, of
Well,
course,
because the
if
problem
this
isn't awareness. That's the
right.
problem. It's not awareness.
all right, but I'm gonna play a little transition card here and go to our maybe final. We might have one additional topic here, but potentially final topic of the day. We always have, if something were to happen to a CISO, a expert in court could defend the CISO, right? At the end of the day, isn't that kind of what could and should happen? Is
Very
a
nice segue.
CISO expert. You like the segue? I thought you would, Adrian. A security expert could come into court and say, "Hey, given the resources we had, we can make the case that this CISO did the best they could. I'm trying to make a dirty little transition here to our next article, our next discussion point, which is called the death of Chevron Deference also affects cyber. And this is an interesting topic that I know very little about. And so, I think first of all, help the audience understand, Katie, what Chevron deference is at just a basic level, and how does this impact cyber across the board?
Okay, so Chevron deference is something that came to be about 40 years ago. It was it was established in 1984 through a legal doctrine, and it established that when a law is ambiguous or there needs to be a decision about what's required in a specific situation, the courts will defer to the regulatory issues. Now, if we're talking about cybersecurity, it could be a NIST, it could be, some sort of regulatory body. There are many of them, and the Chevron defense was put in place because there was a case. It was about a herring fisherman or a herring fishing company. I'm probably saying the wrong words because I'm not really into fishing. But in any case, what happens in that industry is that fishing boats need monitors. And these monitoring programs are there to ensure that there are ethical fishing practices. Now, with Chevron, it was established that the cost of the monitors was supplied by these fishing companies. But there was a whole lot of gray area around the herring industry in particular. And in this case, they had to say, all right, the regulatory body is going to decide the outcome. Flash forward to a few days ago in Looper Bright Enterprises versus Jeannie Raimondo, the Supreme Court, we're talking about the Supreme Court, we're not talking about, some lower courts here, voted along party lines last week to gut Chevron deference. No pun intended with the fishing community. And it basically said that the lower courts can now take over responsibility and that they would not defer to regulatory bodies. So there were a couple of media outlets that wrote about this, including CSO Online and a few others, saying, whoa, what happens here? Because if you're talking about cybersecurity, we know that there's a huge divide between what regulation is, and put forth by regulatory bodies, by people who are working on this with experts who actually practice cybersecurity, and our government who doesn't understand security at all. Now, they've been trying very hard in the last few years. The thing is that one of the things that's been most effective in some of the newest regulations or some of the latest EOs is the collaboration, of course, between regulatory bodies and the government. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's getting a modicum, like tiny little sea salt nugget better. Now what's happened is that the courts can come in if there's any kind of issue and say, nope, we're going to decide who pays for what. We're going to decide who's culpable for what. We're going to decide what laws stand and what laws do not stand. And because there has been so much focus in the last few years, and you mentioned the SEC cyber reporting case, you've mentioned a couple of others as well. These are things that could be challenged. Companies could come in and say, if there's a breach, and say, hey, we're going to challenge this. We're not going to go to regulatory bodies. We're going to take this to the courts. And we know, unfortunately, that in the US in particular, courts tend to defer now along party lines. And I think there's a ginormous fear that certain big businesses are going to benefit and others are not. The legal
What's it mean to
battle,
cyber?
what
What's it
does it
mean to
mean?
cyber?
What does it mean to cyber? I think it means that tech companies are going to be significantly hamstrung. I think that they're going to be punished a lot more severely. And I think some major non tech big businesses, if they suffer a breach, are going to benefit more from court rulings.
And does this add any additional risk to the CISO per our previous conversation?
Depends what kind of CISO you are for what kind of company, and the politics behind it. I hate to say it. I think it's horrible. I think it's horrible, but I think this is all going to come down to partisan politics, and that's not how cybersecurity should be run.
Wow.
I mean, I
That's the
mean,
first time I think. Go ahead, Adrian.
yeah. So I mean, so one of the things, I think you alluded to, that I just want to spell out specifically, Katie, is that there was some kind of statute of limitations. I don't know what the statute of limitations was when it comes to challenging regulations, and that's gone now. That's
Yeah.
eliminated. So how sustainable fishing works. Like a lot of these things that have been like set and settled are now unsettled. So that could impact the
Unsettled.
CISO too.
Um,
Maybe one state decides they're going to start sending CISOs to prison, and another state, has a completely different stance. So now you not
Yeah.
only have a chilling effect on CISOs, but you have a chilling effect on business, on physically where CISOs are willing to go based on where they would be tried in
oh
court
wow.
if anything happened to their company under their watch.
And you're going to have a situation where certain companies can buy out of legal troubles and where they can't. I mean, the state of our legal system is not great right now. Again, it's very much along partisan politics, and that's not how our legal system was intended to be. And it's going to really hurt certain people depending on who you are, where you are, what kind of business you're in, what geography you're in, what kind of business, are there lobbies in Congress for that business or not. I think it's going to get really, really ugly. Now, let's just be very, very, very clear. This decision was not about cybersecurity. This was general sweeping regulation across all industries. So we're obviously speculating the worst for our own industry. But I wouldn't be surprised at all to hear others in finance, healthcare, education, whatever, worry about similar types of things.
Gotcha.
So all that stuff we said about the SEC regulating things, and Ed Amoroso was talking about SEC having a negative effect. So yeah, good news, bad news. Like I guess that all
Right.
gets to be challenged now. But
Oh,
then uh, now the courts make the rules.
The problem, yeah, exactly. To Ed's point, is that we've got regulatory and legal bodies stepping in where security programs are failing to fix it, but they don't know what the heck they're doing. And now they're taking even more control.
yeah. This is an absolute tough one. I don't. Honestly, I'm
It
not
just
even
seems
sure
like
how to.
chaos. Like I don't see how it doesn't result in. Well, I mean, we'll see what kind of lawsuits get filed now that this has been pushed out.
If we
Certainly, it's going to
have any
benefit some
listeners,
folks.
if we have any listeners that are a lawyer by trade or a cyber lawyer,
Oh, I know
I used to
somebody.
know a couple. Yeah, I used to know a couple. I'd love to kind of get your comments on this, and maybe we'll do a another separate interview on the topic because I think this is a very poignant topic specific to cyber. I also think that the SEC impact is a very poignant topic that I'd love to do a half hour special with a good legal expert on this. So maybe we'll put that on the to do list. But um, from a second to last story, I'm going to squeeze in one more story. I was going to go to story number 5, but I want to squeeze in one more story here that nobody knows coming. In particular, I want to talk about the auto dealers back online because I'm left with some questions here. And Adrian and I had a little off, kind of a back and forth, a little bit off channel about this. For those of you that don't know, CDK Global is a massive company. I didn't realize how big they were, to be honest with you. Um, they were acquired in April 22 for $8 billion by parent holding company Brookfield Business Partners. CDK Global is the SaaS backend software that runs all of the, almost all of the vast majority of the car dealerships throughout the United States of America. And so they got smashed with a pretty big ransom that we've talked about. I don't know if we talked about it in the pod, but I know we've talked about it in the newsletter a couple times. Um, and the question I had, and I don't know if Adrian, usually this would be a perfect discussion with Rick, but he's not here today. So maybe Adrian can give me some views here. But how do companies actually go about paying a ransom? This is the
Mhm.
question. When I read into this story, it was a $25 million ransom that nobody can really prove that was paid. But when ransom trackers, people that track ransom, tracked it, there was a 24 point something million dollar crypto payment
Mhm.
to a ransomware group called Black Suit. They believe it came from the CDK Global. The question I want to know is like, how does that happen? Because I'll tell you right now, a $25 million transfer between two companies of USD is not something that just occurs super easy. Like this takes time, this takes closing, legal, people going through from a finance standpoint to make sure it's going to the correct places and chopped up the right way before any of that gets transferred. I can't imagine CDK Global, a company that does management of contracts and closing deals for car dealerships, has anybody
Yeah.
on staff that can manage that level of a
And
crypto transfer.
yeah, well, and they don't have the crypto, right? And you can't just go to a crypto
Exactly.
exchange and say, "Hey, I want to take this $25 million and turn it into Bitcoin." You have to start out with like $600. And if you're not shady, then next week you can do $1,200. Like they're going to step you up. There's a lot of KYC stuff they have to do as well.
Yep.
But yeah, so you outsource it, right? So yeah, I think
Okay.
early on in this, a lot of IR firms realized that it would benefit them to have the Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, in case one of their clients did choose to pay, and then they could make a little money off it. You make for 6% of that 25 million, you can use our 25 million to pay it. And then there are, the IR firm might have a negotiator, and then there's some independent negotiators, and it's not. Yeah, so I'm not an expert on this, but I know a little bit about everything, and I remember reading into some long read stories on how some of this stuff goes down. There was an expose on someone who is a negotiator, and it was not entirely unclear whether or not there was collusion between the ransomware crew and the negotiator themselves.
Wow.
Hold
Uh,
on. You said it was not entirely unclear. Did you mean the double negative?
yeah, yeah, not entirely clear. No, I did not.
Okay. All right. All
Sorry,
right. I
sorry.
just want to. Okay.
I've been learning Portuguese. It's normal to double negative in some languages. Um,
So so that scares the shit out of me, Adrian, because last year in 2024, 2023, um, there was 1.1 billion in ransomware payments last
yeah,
year,
yeah,
according
a
to
record.
some
Yep.
sources. Yeah,
First time it went over a billion. Yeah.
right. So okay,
I think
five
Chainalysis is
percent of
where
a
that usually
billion
comes out
is
of. Yeah.
5% of a billion is whatever magic number is, and I'm too lazy to guess and try to do the math in my head, but it's huge. It's a lot of
It
money.
seems like a conflict of interest, huh?
Yes, and that's where I'm going with this is the only way that I think, and I hadn't thought of this until I just heard your
Me
description,
Yeah,
is the IR companies doing it does make a bit more sense to me because they are incented to work for you as the
right.
ransomee in this scenario. They are incented to get you the best deal that they can, right? Because you're doing other business with them and things like that. And I can see, okay, we have 100 million stored in crypto ready to go that we're going to be able to transfer around as necessary to help you.
Eh,
But
you wanna
even
do a
then,
wire
if I'm
transfer,
taking,
bank's gonna charge you a fee, right? Like
but even then, if I'm taking a percent, am I really trying to drive that number down or just
Right.
get the deal done as quick as possible, right? So it's yeah, so this one
Yeah.
kind of blew my mind last week. We covered it in the newsletter last week and I was a little bit shocked by the amount of ransomware that's happened. So I'm going to end this story
Well,
quick cuz
well,
I know
well,
we're running out of
we
time
we
here.
we forgot to mention insurance companies who ultimately, if you have cyber insurance, they're the ones that get to name the firm that you're the negotiator that you're working with. So that's another party that you need to keep in mind when working out the mechanics of this in your head.
Oh my gosh, so much opportunity for corruption and conflicts of
You
interest
don't get to
and
choose a negotiator. The company that's paying is, and if that's your insurance policy, that's your insurance company.
but they're not gonna have the 25 million in crypto laying around either. They've gotta work with that third party to actually make it
Right.
work. So, yeah, okay. The mix of incentives there is extremely disturbing. I feel like I have to do a graphic and write a piece on this. But that being said, the last question I'll leave you both with is 2025. Do we break the record in ransomware in 2025? Do we break 1.1?
It went down last year, right? Like in 2022, it went
Interesting.
down to like half a billion. It was just under half a billion or just over half a billion. And this year it was 1.1. I think it's really unpredictable.
Are we gonna break it? No?
I
I
mean,
don't
I
know.
Nope.
feel like whatever I say, it's just a,
I don't know enough about the,
finger in the
yeah.
air. Cause yeah. I mean, if the opportunity's there, 100% these ransomware actors are
I
gonna go after it. If it's something else, they'll go after that.
I'll make a bet. I'll bet that it does go up. And the reason I'm betting on that, I interviewed Derek Mankey, who's the head of research at Fortinet Labs, and when I chatted with him, one of the big changes that he's seeing is that that's really distracting, Tyler.
Sorry, I'm prepping for the next story.
And the the reason for me guessing up is that the ransomware crews have gotten more savvy, and instead of just blindly encrypting data, they're now doing the research they need to figure out how to disrupt operations directly. Because they're finding
Yeah.
it's easier to get like the auto industry story that you keep referring back to,
Yeah.
easier to get ransoms paid if you're directly hitting the revenue stream.
Well, that and you're also hitting a supply chain
Oh
situation,
yeah,
right?
and
So you look for
everybody
the
else's
SaaS,
revenue stream, right?
yeah, you're hitting one.
Pressure
I
cooker.
always used to call it voice amplification on my attacks. I want voice amplification on my attacks.
Yeah.
And to do that, if I can hit the software supply chain that supplies the software that runs 5,000 dealerships as opposed to ransoming each individual dealership, I got one ransom that's going to pay me extra zeros on the end of that because they have all these customers that are down.
Distributed nagging as a
All right.
service.
Egg DNAGs. I love it. All right. All right. We're on story number 5, our final story of the day. For those of you that don't know, story number 5 is in the newsletter is the bottom story. And we always try to put something a little bit fun, a little bit interesting, sometimes funny if we can get it in there. And this is straight out of this week's newsletter. And this is the new free aim VR shoes. So I'm going to do my best to describe visually what this might look like for those that aren't watching on the stream. But for those that are watching on the stream, I'm sharing a video right now of essentially it is some plastic shoes that have rollers on the bottom. So instead of actually walking on a treadmill that you can walk in all different directions and have your in-game motion occur, these are actually individual kind of micro treadmills that you attach
It
to each foot.
removes the need for that funky treadmill that you see people on.
It does remove that need, but simultaneously they also put you what appears to be in like a little walker, like plastic tubing walker, so that A, I guess you can maintain your balance and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
don't fall
because
over, and B, if
yeah, it's a
gives you a
big
little
issue with
protection in
VR
case you
games.
get.
Is it messes with your inner ear, gives you some of that like what you take Dramamine, like why you get car sick, right?
It's well, I can't. So I've been trying to play. There's a couple of VR MMOs I've tried to pick up and play, and I immediately will vomit within 15 minutes of playing them. So I can't do it. So
It's
this is
actually
out
part
of
of the
out of
rating.
reach for me.
It's part of the rating. If you look in the VR app stores, there's a rating for like the likelihood of you getting some kind of inner ear imbalance or getting sick. Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah,
fun. Sign me up.
well, for those of you that are looking at the video version of here, I think just if I looked like this, I would get sick without even going into VR if I looked this stupid. So, yeah. So that's our story number 5 of the
He
day.
does not look
The
cool.
free
You're
aim,
correct.
the free, the free aim VR plastic booty shoe things.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
strap onto
go
your
get them.
socks or your sneakers or something like that, it looks like.
They do, yeah. They
Yeah.
strap right in. You step into them with your socks, and they Velcro your feet right to the little shoes, and off you go. The SDK for those that want to play with it early is $4,999 for a pair with an SDK, and they should be coming out soon for purchase. For I believe they're retailing for $1,000.
And
So
then
if you're
on
looking for
top
a
of that, you
thousand
need
pair,
to allocate between $5,000 and $8,000 for refinishing your hardwood floors when you're done.
And for busting your hip when you
yes,
if
absolutely.
it depends on if you're playing Resident Evil 4 with these. Yeah, yeah. Save some money for paying your medical deposits.
Yeah, the guy just FYI for those that aren't watching the video, the guy doesn't run. Let's be real here. He
Yeah,
is slowly walking. So if you got to run somewhere, I'm not sure these little plastic booties are gonna work for you. But
yeah.
yeah, so that's our final story number 5 of the day. We'll leave you with that. Adrian, thank you very much for coming on the show. I appreciate you as always, my friend. Thank you, Katie. Love having you on and your commentary. This has been a super interesting pod for us this week. We've been very much focused on some things that were non-technical and non traditional for us. So I appreciate you guys taking the time. Thank you to our super production team, Dead Inside Media, and Sean, the super producer. Sean, thank you very much for helping us out. Thank you to Katie's cat, who's decided to make a cameo appearance as we're going through the closing segment here. And thank you very much to our sponsor, Material Security, for being our lead sponsor. I love you guys. Have a wonderful week. And yeah, we'll see you in a few weeks.